Good morning, everyone. It's great to have you here on the last day of our 10th Brussels Forum, but we could not be more excited than to be opening today with remarks from the President of Poland. I am extremely privileged to be introducing President Komorowski. I think you will know that there is an election coming up in Poland in May, presidential election, so we are particularly grateful to him for having made this trip to Brussels at this time. And I think, as all of us also know, he is the most trusted politician in Poland today. One of the themes of this forum over the weekend has been evolution and the past 10 years. And when we think about Poland's role, it is really remarkable how Poland has become such a significant member of both NATO and the European Union. And as we think about Poland's role and Poland's voice in these institutions over this decade, I think there are two markers coming up that are so significant. In the NATO context, we are on the road to Warsaw. There will be the first NATO summit in Warsaw next summer, and this is certainly such a significant achievement for the alliance and for Poland. And as we also are here in Brussels, home of the European Union, we're also well aware that for the first time, the European Council has a Polish president as well. So there are many things that remind us of the significant role that Poland is playing in our transatlantic community and in the world. I also want to underscore what a terrific friend President Komorowski has been to the German Marshall Fund of the United States. He spoke at GMF during his Washington visit in 2010, and we were very honored to have him open GMF's office in Warsaw in 2011, and he has continued to be a wonderful supporter of all of the work that we do, and we are so grateful for that. As I mentioned, Poland is a key member of NATO, and in that context, but also in so many others, Poland is an important ally of the United States. And I think we all took note when President Obama visited Poland last June, on June 4, to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the first free and fair election in Poland. That is such a striking vignette as we think about the neighborhood in which Poland lives, and in particular, the situation in Poland's neighbor, Ukraine. And I know that all of us are much looking forward to hearing President Komorowski's remarks, both on the state of the European security order and the state of the transatlantic relationship. So with that, I would ask you all to join me in welcoming President Komorowski.
Szanowni Państwo,
ladies and gentlemen, on the 22nd of March, 1945, exactly 70 years ago, in the decisive operation in the Western Front, American and British troops embarked on the passage over the Rhine River in the vicinity of Oppenheim. At the same time, Polish troops, arm in arm with European and American allies, were liberating also those lands, northern Belgium, southern Netherlands, from the yoke of those who, in the name of insane ideology, shaking the very foundations of the European civilization, wanted to subdue the entire continent to their hegemony. The Poles were bringing then freedom to the liberated nations of Western Europe, but unfortunately they themselves were not able to reap the fruit of their victory. Western Europe, after a decades-long history of strengthening of national egoisms and the Darwinist approach in international relations, finally turned to what united and not divided European nations. towards common values, towards security based on prosperity and cooperation with neighbors. We, the Poles, but also many other nations of our part of Europe, landed on the wrong side of the Iron Curtain, and we could only follow these integration processes from afar. We could follow them, and to tell you the truth, we could only envy. We could do this until the moment of the regaining of our freedom at the turn of 1989 and 1990. With attention and obvious sense of envy, we admired the successes of Western Europe, the successes which were possible thanks to the cooperation and security provided by the United States, thanks to the NATO umbrella. When finally we were also given a chance to join the community of free nations, many were inclined, also in Poland, to believe in Fukuyama's end of history, in the vision of the universe triumph of liberal democracy and peaceful cooperation of countries in the globalized world. Today, however, we can see, and today we repeat, according to the Polish experience, that the foundations of our security have been seriously shaken. We must state the fact openly. The post-Cold War period of the dividend of peace is over. Today the problem of security manifests itself with its all might, from energy security, through the defense of our citizens from the acts of terror, the support for territorial integrity of countries that are close to us, up to the necessities to strengthen our own defense in the face of the return to the use of force in our direct neighborhood, in our region, and international relations. Last Wednesday, Tunisia became a scene of a brutal and cowardly terrorist attack. It's been a year now since the armed occupation of Crimea. It was an anniversary of the event that was the first forced annexation of a territory of another state in Europe since the Second World War. By perpetrating this unprecedented act of revisionism, Russia challenged European security and order. By the same token, Russia undermined the trust that is so important for the European continent based on the Helsinki Final Act. Those events prompt an in-depth reflection on the entire Western policy towards Russia. For too long, we were illusioned in the West that Russia, in its own interest, will accept our offer to get involved in the network of various connections with the Western world and will go down the path of modernization and democratization. For too long, we wouldn't see in the Kremlin the rebirth of tendencies to stifle liberties, to think in terms of the policy of force, in terms of the policy of zones of influence, to the revision of the post-Cold War order in Europe. 10 years ago already, President Vladimir Putin defined the collapse of the USSR, the greatest geopolitical disaster of the century. This is how he defined a process which in Poland and all over Central and Eastern European Union, and as I believe all over the United Europe, is seen as a source of freedom and development of the whole Europe. It is worthwhile remembering that for years there has also been an increased financial effort of Russia for the development of their armed forces, and it is at the level of over 4% of their GDP. Therefore, a new way of thinking is needed, a new long-term transatlantic strategy towards Russia. The strategy that could unite the West in the face of a new challenge which affects the key values and interests of the European community. Euro-Atlantic community. This strategy that would combine the efforts of the leading institutions on both sides of the Atlantic, both the European Union and NATO. I hope that it will be one of the top conclusions of this year's Brussels Forum. Concurrently, it is for the first time that we are confronted with the hybrid toolbox in a conflict applied on such a scale and in this format, starting from the propaganda machinery, through cyber attacks, provocation, or energy blackmail. The intensity of the information warfare we experience is unprecedented since the Cold War. This war is waged not only via mass media, but also research institutions of dubious connections and servile politicians. This war has an objective to cast a seed of doubt as to our reasons, instigate ethnic animosities, and create divisions in the transatlantic community. All these actions, however, would not have brought results if it hadn't been for a threat of using regular armed forces and military force. And actually, it was the case. Ladies and gentlemen, in the period of such a great uncertainty, it is difficult to strengthen the unity of solidarity of the broadly understood West. It is absolutely a must, however, and the challenge is all the greater that by strengthening the transatlantic community at the same time we have to seek common answers to geostrategic problems in all our neighborhood. In today's globalized world, problems of one member of the Euro-Atlantic community sooner or later may escalate and become problems of the entire West. And the result of that, we, the Poles, but also many other nations of our region of Europe, neighboring on Ukraine, do not lose from our radar screen the challenges emerging, for example, south of the European borders. It is worthwhile remembering that among victims of the Wednesday's attack in Tunis, there were also Polish people. These challenges, both in the east and in the south, will be raised during the upcoming NATO summit in Warsaw. That is why already now we have to try to seek the right answers. There are different threats. They are diverse. Their nature is different. The nature of the threats is different in Iraq, in Syria, in Lebanon, or in Ukraine. However, they have one common denominator, and this denominator is the contempt for international order, for human rights, for the rule of law, and for the idea of civil liberties. The contempt for people who desire freedom, people who want to be a democratic nation, choosing the world of the Western values. It is not a coincidence that the original target of the Western terrorist attack in Tunisia was the parliament. It is not a coincidence that those Ukrainians who went out to the Maidan in Kiev proclaiming that they were sovereign in their own state provoked fury in a powerful neighbor, which opted to launch an unprecedented aggression in Europe. The return to the imperial policy of force, the drive to keep neighbors in servitude and dependence, denial to recognize civilized rules of the law and international relations bear as concerning remembrance to the darkest periods of the history of Europe of the 20th century. The war ongoing for a year is for Russia a brutal attempt to trample not only the territorial integrity of Ukraine, but primarily sovereignty of the Ukrainian nation, to deprive it of its dreams to repair their state, dreams of the membership in the Euro-Atlantic community of nations. It simply puts a halt to the aspirations and dreams of Ukrainians to find their place in the world of Western values. In the times when we have to face these fundamental challenges, Europe and the United States share the responsibility for the strength of the transatlantic bond and for NATO. which has played, and I hope will continue to play, a pivotal stabilizing role also in the global international order. Thus, in spite of disputes that emerge now and then, we should not cease in our efforts to strengthen the transatlantic trust, which is sometimes violated or questioned. That is a huge task for governments and civil society institutions, both sides of the Atlantic, including, as I can see, for the German Marshall Fund. The alliance and its stabilization role is based on a strong fundament, a strong foundation, which is the Washington Treaty, the readiness to reach out and help one another should the need arise. In Article 3 of the Washington Treaty, member states committed themselves that by means of continuous and effective self-help and mutual aid will maintain and develop their individual and collective capacity to resist armed attack. These commitments form a constitution of our thinking of Europe's security and transatlantic bonds. It is important that last NATO summit in Wales, in Newport, reconfirmed these commitments. I hope that we will not be short of consistency in the implementation of the decisions of the Newport summit. It is a question of not only effective mechanisms that would stop the possible aggressor, it is about the credibility of the alliance. The implementation of Newport's commitments is the question of the credibility of NATO. Our commitments are also very important in terms of defense spending. They are as important as other Newport commitments, and those Newport commitments must be implemented on all their aspects concerning the defense infrastructure, prepositioned logistics, as well as specialized systems that would allow for the fast and effective response. What is equally important is the development of our credibility by means of actual growth of the level of financial engagement in the development of the power of the alliance. In particular, it is about the allocation by NATO member states of at least 2% of their GDP to defense. I know that one can and one should point out the volume of the defense budgets, but at the same time we have to remember that at that time when NATO's postulate is 2% of GDP, which in many countries is much lower. In Russia at the same time, consistently for many years, the level of the funding of their own armed forces is above 4% of their GDP. We can't turn a blind eye to this crude reality, because this crude reality decides upon our relations. Here, I would like to say that I'm proud that Poland reached the level of 2% of GDP devoted to defense already in 2001. I am proud of that, because I believe it's really worthwhile thinking ahead and not responding only to the situation that has happened. We are counting on our allies to undertake a similar effort, and we are grateful to such countries as Estonia that have already raised their defense budgets timely. In our part of the world, we understand perfectly well that defense cuts can simply backfire quite fast. They can backfire in unprecedentedly higher cost to pay in case of decreasing our security today. And it can imply also the possibility to lose our sovereignty tomorrow. In the history of our part of Europe, it has happened many times. Just as no one doubts that there is the need to invest in the better future of our children, so no one should doubt that the investment in security is an inalienable part of this investment. We remember that it is the cooperation with the United States and NATO umbrella have created the necessary security space for the development of Western Europe. Today, when we are again facing security challenges, NATO must remain an effective military alliance so that it could provide us with the possibility of making decisions without yielding to threats. Threats even because of the sense of our own weakness. Deterrence is not the antithesis of cooperation and dialogue, but it is the necessary complementation. For there are forces in the world that disregard their commitments if they sense the weakness in their partners, including military weakness, or if they sense indecision or lack of determination. The history of Europe of the 20th century offers us a painful lesson that concessions in the face of violence are taken by an aggressor as encouragement to continue the aggression. We also should remember this in the 70th anniversary of the end of the Second World War. Ladies and gentlemen, geologists say that in over 200 million years, Europe and America, the continents, will merge. But we should ask ourselves a question: why wait so long? Today we can unite Europeans and Americans. We don't have to wait for geology to do the job for us. Let's not waste this incredible, difficult but incredible opportunity. We must act now. The bonds of Europe with North America should not be limited to security alone. They should also be connected with what is the foundation of security, which is economy and politics. Soon after the war, the Marshall Plan let Western Europe rise from ashes, and American cargo planes helped the people of West Berlin to survive the Soviet blockade. Poland was not able to get the benefit of the Marshall Plan, but I believe that here in the GMF, that has the name of this eminent politician, it is worthwhile saying that today it is Ukraine that needs a new Marshall Plan, the support to carry out difficult reforms. The biggest threat to Ukraine is not only the military division of Taman. What is their greatest enemy is their own weaknesses and the weakness of their system. The fate of Ukraine, the chance of Ukraine to carry out a deep reform and transformation is also the key to the future of the whole Eastern Europe. And I believe that it is also the key to the future of the whole Western world. That is why I believe that the new Marshall Plan is a difficult challenge, but it is incredibly important. The new momentum for the transatlantic community should be provided also by common economic space in the face of the TTIP. In Poland, we realize perfectly well that the execution of the TTIP is difficult for all the parties. But from the Polish perspective, from the perspective of the Polish observation of history as well as the future, it is something which is most important to take up from the perspective of the strength of the Western world in the future. And the Western world, only if it is strong, can be safe and secure. It is not just a trade deal, it is a missing link of the transatlantic community, a project of civilizational magnitude. If you want to keep the viability of our community, let us invest in the success of this incredibly important idea. When the gravity of the world is shifting towards the Pacific, we should give the Western world more stability and more security by means of strengthening the transatlantic relations. The keeping of political, military, economic and social transatlantic bonds is, in my opinion, the best investment in our common future. and in our common security. Today, when Europe is surrounded by chaos from the south and from the east by authoritarian regime, the system which is increasingly brutal for people who are longing for freedom, more than ever, we need perseverance in our striving to assure security and conditions for prosperity and welfare across the transatlantic space. Our shared future and the future of our common values shall depend on it. And here, we really have to show that we are courageous, bold, and we have to face up to those great challenges. Thank you very much.
President Komorowski, thank you so much for those
Bardzo dziękuję za te naprawdę bardzo dobre uwagi dotyczące wyzwań, które stoją przed nami, zarówno ze strony wschodu, jak i ze strony południa. Dziękuję za Pana sugestie, jak możemy stawić czoła tym wyzwaniom. Czy chodzi tutaj o zwiększenie wydatków na obronność, czy chodzi o głębszą współpracę transatlantycką. I muszę przyznać, że nigdy nie słyszałam o połączeniu się tych kontynentów europejskiego i amerykańskiego pod względem geologicznym, ale to cudowna metafora. Pan prezydent ma mało czasu, ale zgodził się, zgodził się odpowiedzieć na parę pytań, także proszę, przekazujemy głos Państwu. Kto chciałby zadać pierwsze pytanie? Proszę. I proszę się przedstawić. A mikrofon już idzie. Dziękuję. Josh Rogan. Jestem raporterem z Bloomberg View z Waszyngtonu. Panie prezydencie, powiedziano nam, że wschodnia strona NATO została wzmocniona zwiększonymi zdolnościami. Równocześnie wydaje się, że skala tych zdolności jest nieproporcjonalna do zwiększonego zagrożenia. Jakie zdolności chciałby Pan widzieć w NATO i w Stanach Zjednoczonych? Co chcielibyście, żeby NATO i Stany Zjednoczone dały Polsce? Co myśli Pan o tym, że o tych zdolnościach, które do tej pory zostały do Polski przekazane? Jak to wygląda?
Po pierwsze,
first of all, it is about the implementation of Newport's decisions. We all know that between making a decision and an implementation of the decision, there is a long and uneasy way to follow. Whether those decisions are implemented in the practice of NATO, we will be able to evaluate during NATO summit in Warsaw next year. What is most important for us is not only the footprint, the presence of NATO's installations. We believe that it is important, of course, first of all, from the perspective of the effectiveness for the execution of the contingency plan that we have. Without a defense infrastructure, without pre-positioned equipment and logistics, the execution of the contingency plan in case of crisis can be quite difficult. The pre-positioned logistics like spares, ammunition, different stores for logistics, it's very important and necessary for everyone to have the conviction, including the potential aggressor, to have this conviction that NATO is truly determined to execute contingency plans. Except for the contingency plans, we believe that what is fundamental is the existence of the defense plans that would be much deeper and detailed for all those very complicated questions of defense. Another thing is the necessity to confirm by means of the presence of NATO troops. I'm talking here about this permanent, continuous presence of NATO troops to confirm NATO's determination, and it is happening, although there is still this discussion underway whether we call this presence permanent or continuous or rotational. Poland really appreciates very much the decision of NATO concerning this continuous presence, but we do not want to be treated as a country that, from the perspective of the observation of our powerful Russian neighbor, any limitations connected with the membership in NATO. Poland also gives quite much for our potential. For example, we have deployed significant number of troops to NATO operation in Afghanistan, and today we are also participating in the air policing mission to protect the airspace over the Baltic states. So any investment in the defense system of Poland, the security of Poland, leads also to the growth of our engagement in common operations for the security of other countries of the alliance. Dziękuję bardzo. Przekazuję mikrofon dalej. To będzie ostatnie pytanie.
Dzień dobry, panie prezydencie.
Chciałbym zadać panu pytanie następujące. Rozumiem, dlaczego mówi pan głównie o stronie wojskowej, czy o stronie sojuszniczej, ale jeżeli trwa konflikt z jakimś partnerem, powinno się starać realizować konflikt na takim polu, gdzie ma się przewagę. Pod kątem wojskowym prawdopodobnie ta wojskowość to nie jest ten obszar, gdzie NATO tak naprawdę ma tak dużą przewagę w porównaniu z Rosją. Ja myślę, że tutaj również mamy pewną przewagę, ale nie jest ona aż tak duża jak w przypadku pola ekonomicznego. Jeżeli będziemy starali się przejść na obszar ekonomiczny i polityczny, to jakie byłyby sugestie Polski, żeby klarownie Rosji powiedzieć i pokazać, że ten konflikt nie może być przez Rosję wygrany. Demokracje może działają wolno, ale w kategoriach długofalowych są silniejsze. I można zobaczyć to na przykład w Niemczech. Jeżeli popatrzy się Niemcy, to ponad 80% Niemców w badaniach opinii publicznej mówi, że nie można wierzyć Rosji. Ponad połowa Niemców mówi, że trzeba inwestować więcej w naszą obronność. Badania opinii publicznej rok temu wcale by tak nie wyglądały. Zatem jaka jest polska propozycja, żebyśmy my ten konflikt przenieśli na te pola, w których mamy znacznie większą przewagę?
Ja się z panem w znacznej mierze zgadzam.
I agree with you largely. I agree that the Western world should use these elements of its arsenal where it has a decisive supremacy. Certainly, the Western world is mainly better off in the field of economy. And sometimes it is important for us to remember that the Russian economy, the size of the Russian economy is equal to the Italian economy, with all due respect to the Italian economy and Italian achievements. But the size of the whole Russian economy is equal to the economy of Italy. In terms of the demographic potential, Russia has 15 million people more than Japan, its neighbors on. So these proportions are not really shocking. They don't really give grounds for great respect. The economic power of the Western world should be definitely taken advantage of as much as possible to build mechanisms to discourage Russia and other countries from the possible aggression. The problem is that with these proportions of the economic power, Russia, however, decided to use their armed forces. Russia decided to go with the armed solution towards Ukraine, and Russia was successful in its attempts with all this disproportion of the economic power. So the Western world has a problem which is connected with the fact that the Western world has lesser possibility to mobilize Western resources and use them in confrontation. The Western world is less determined, and there is a more difficult mechanism for making agreements. What is an additional strength on the side of the West is the unity. Even if some weaker decisions, less determined, but weaker decisions, if they are the decisions of the united Western world, they are always better and they work better. The problem is that a possible success of the policy of using force by Putin against Ukraine will be an encouragement not to be afraid that the West would use its great economic power. that using pressure, organized in different manners, one can be politically successful without risking too much. That is why the policy of sanctions is so important. It is relatively mild. I believe that Russia feels most painfully the decrease of the prices of oil. And this is not an element of sanctions, it is simply the outcome of the trends that are taking place in the global economy. And it will be something Russia will be limited by, but for the time being, Russia, with all these disproportions of the economic power, is successful because of its determination and the early launching of the processes of the modernization of their armed forces and their capabilities. Russia has been modernizing their armed forces for over 8 or 9 years now, and it has been consistent. It has invested a lot in their defense capabilities, and Russia wants now to get dividend from their defense investments. And this is the Russian advantage.
President Komorowski, it has been a privilege to host you this morning. Thanks from GMF for being here, and I know everyone will want to thank you for your thoughts.